I'll bring up our speaker in just a second, but let me introduce him first. After getting stung by the startup bug, Marijn founded a SaaS business in which he was involved for the next 6 years. This experience provided him with a realistic perspective on business and firm roots in software architecture. Today, Marijn works as an independent software consultant for corporate startups and scale-ups within Europe. The title of his talk is How to Relate Your OKRs to Your Technical Real Estate. Please put your hands together for Marijn Huizenveld.
Hello. At the end of this presentation, you'll be able to produce a Wardley map for the existing OKRs of your organization. Now, if you aren't using OKRs yet, then you'll be able to use the map to spot opportunities for objectives that are worthwhile to pursue. When you map, you graph your dependencies, and if you do this with a diverse group of people from various disciplines, then you'll be able to explain how some of your higher level objectives are limited by constraints within your value chain and the systems that support it. Now, I'm convinced that with that newfound situational awareness, you'll be able to drive collective decision making, and as a consequence of that, you'll be far more effective at implementing your strategy. So my job is done here today if you are as excited as I am about trying these ideas in your own context. Now, maybe you came here today because you want to hear everything about Wardley Maps, or perhaps you're interested in OKRs. But this talk is really about combining both of these together. But rest assured, I'm going to make sure I'll cover the basics of both of these topics. Unfortunately for you, I'll be doing that using corny visual metaphors. So my name is Marijn Huizenveld, and I work as an independent consultant for scale-ups in Europe. And the question that clients often ask me is a version of, how can we remain effective now that we significantly increased our headcount? So a while ago, I was at a conference like this, and somebody asked me at what level I operate when I work with my clients. Now, I found it an interesting question, but simultaneously also a slightly funny one, because it assumes that we have a shared understanding of what levels exist. Now, I think in order to be effective, you need to operate at 3 different levels. First of all, you need to have tactical skills. We're at a technical conference here, so what does that mean? Well, the team needs to be able to solve problems, right? In my perspective, they need to be able to listen to conversations that they're having with experts, read documents, and be able to extract that knowledge and turn that into useful models that can power their software systems. But it also means that they need to be able to describe how the system is supposed to behave using tests that are not coupled to implementation, so that when they want to evolve the implementation, it's the tests that help them do this rather than the tests that keep them from doing it at all. They need to be able to hide complex subsystems behind interfaces so that when they're working with these models, they can focus on the business problem at hand and not be distracted by any of the technicalities of working with these complex systems. Now, it's not just the technical stuff, it's also interpersonal. For example, some team member needs to be able to explain to the rest of the team why they think one alternative is a more suitable candidate for solving the problem than all of the other alternatives that they have to their availability. So let's say that the team possesses these skills and a few other ones. You could say that the team is able to march very effectively, but perhaps they're walking into the wrong direction and are headed off a cliff. So they need more than just that, right? They need a sense of direction. Where are we going and why are we going there? And also, why are we taking this route? Why didn't we choose any of the other routes that could lead us to that very same outcome? So it's not just tactical ability, we need a strategy. Now, when we have those 2 things, we still don't have enough because we might be organized in an ineffective way. So we want to make sure that we're able to turn that strategy, thanks to our tactical skills, into something workable, right? We want to make sure that we can turn tactical successes into strategic successes. So we need to be able to operate based on that strategy. So we need to have tactical skills, strategy, and an operational model. Now, this talk today is about me playing around with the strategy that was handed to me by a client. And let's get started talking about that. But first, I want to ask you a question. How does strategy help us? So imagine that we're on the road to success, and we're cruising along with our team, right? And at some point, a team member shouts, "Wait, stop! I think I saw a pot of gold." Now, what do? Do we continue because what's waiting for us at the end of this road is far more than this pot of gold? Or is this perhaps the moment where we're supposed to pivot because, we've just struck on a very valuable opportunity? Now, a strategy allows us to interpret the world around us and allows us to understand which events in our environment are distractions and which events are things that we need to take very seriously. Or to put it different, as Simon Wardley phrased it here, strategy is all about observing the landscape, understanding how it's changing, and using what resources you have to maximize your chances of success. So the organization that I was working with used a focusing mechanism, right? And their focusing mechanism was OKRs. So OKRs stands for objectives and key results. The objective is something that gets people jumping out of bed each morning. It's what people are excited about. It's why they've joined this team or this organization. It's a big, audacious goal, right? It's something qualitative, right? It's aspirational. And it's something that we want to achieve in a small, short time scale. So typically as short as possible. But common time scale is about 3 months. So the objective is something aspirational, an outcome that we want to achieve. And key results are the metrics that inform us that we have in fact achieved the objective. Now in most implementations what you'll see is for an objective you'll have around 3 to 5 key results. But I always think that less is more because it reduces the cognitive load. So key results are those indicators that inform us that we're on the right track. There's actually a silent H to OKRs. We should have called it OKR HMS, but unfortunately that doesn't roll off the tongue that nicely. Now the H stands for health metrics. These are the things we don't want to be sacrificing because they will be difficult to regain once they're lost. So these are the bridges we don't want to be burning. You could imagine that if you give a team an audacious big goal, right, an outcome that they're supposed to achieve, and then you tell them, here's the metrics that inform us when we've achieved it, that they might be sacrificing things we don't want to be sacrificing. Now, health metrics will be the thing that will inform us that that is in fact happening. And that's important, because we can mess up trying to achieve our objectives many times, but we can mess up our health only once. So let's look at an example. Finish the Phoenix project. What do you think? Is this a good objective? I'm not talking about the book here, by the way. It's not, because finish the Phoenix project is an output, right? It's do this thing, it's build this feature, finish this project, write this plan. It's about doing something, but nothing tells us that doing that thing will actually achieve anything meaningful for our organization. So we're looking for objectives that are outcome-oriented. Now let's imagine that we're working for an organization that is trying to compete with these brands, right? Gorillas, Getir, Flink. And our organization is called Shopee Floppy. So what we do is we allow people that don't want to buy groceries to order them online and receive them within 10 minutes time. So we've worked long and hard with the team to think about what we want to achieve when we're entering a new market. And after some workshop, we found that catapulting ourselves into the market for everyday items is something that resonated with the team. This is something that people could get behind. People get excited about it, right? This is what we want to achieve when we're entering a new market. Now, what could be some exemplary key results? Well, revenue of 100,000 euros within the first 30 days after launch, or 50% of customers refer friends and family, or 250 reviews, of which 80% is 4 out of 5 stars. Now the thing is, what you measure is decided by the team, and how you measure it is also decided by the team. So that means that we need to welcome challenge when we're introducing these metrics, because we might be lying to ourselves. Huh? Oh, I see that you will, let's agree that you will decide on your own grades. I see that you've passed all of your exams. So we want to make sure that we're transparent about the metrics that we're using in order to determine whether or not we've been successful, because we might be lying to ourselves. And it's not just about picking the wrong metrics, it's also maybe misinterpreting the data. Some things might not be as precise as we think they are. Now let's look at some exemplary health metrics. So team happiness stable at 3 out of 3. We invested a lot in building up a team, and we don't want to sacrifice that important, valuable asset for the organization. We want to make sure that the cost of acquisition is below the average order profit. We certainly want new customers, but we don't want to give away groceries for free. And we want to make sure that the cash flow in exceeds the cash flow out, because the only reason why companies go out of business is because they run out of money. Now there are some common causes of failure with objectives and key results. And the first one is set and forget. That's when we organize a workshop, we get everybody excited about the objective, and we figure out good key results, things that are really indicating success. We even have an outcome-oriented objective. And we've got some good health metrics, and then the next Monday comes along, and we just return to business as usual, and another 12 Mondays pass, and all of a sudden, the quarter is passed, and we're surprised we didn't make our key results. So making sure that you have a cadence around these things is essential for success. Now, I had a startup, as you heard, and we were often too ambitious with what we're trying to achieve. We weren't aiming for the moon, but we were aiming for Mars. Well, let's just leave that to Elon Musk. Make sure that you set a goal that is difficult to achieve, but not impossible, because one of the reasons why this works is that the team gets a high every once in a while of achieving something that seemed tremendously difficult up front. Now the opposite might also happen. Maybe you're an organization that punishes failure, and then people might be aiming too low. So they feel that if they would try to aim a bit higher, they would get punished for it, and as a consequence, they're not setting goals that are ambitious enough. Now when we're organizing around all of this, and we want to find our objectives and key results, we obviously want to do this with people that understand our landscape, our systems, and the things that we're trying to achieve. Now the problem with that is that when we're doing it with people that know their way around the business, they will have a lot of ideas on how to implement things, whether it's on the business side or on the technology side. And as a consequence of that, those people might start to make decisions for the team. And when we do that, we rob the team of autonomy, and therefore it doesn't really work very well, because teams can no longer decide how they want to achieve their objective, and therefore they can't really own what they're doing. Now a final common cause for failure is a lack of a business goal. Let's say replacing Kafka with some cloud-native technology. Although that might be a worthwhile project, it's not something that will be very effectively managed using OKRs. Now, one way to deal with all of these problems is by introducing a status email. And a status email is something that you can send out every week, where in a very short format, you explain what has happened and what you're going to do in the next week. And it's all about measuring your confidence and sharing that with the rest of the organization. Now, make it easy to scan by introducing some simple visual cues, like colors for whenever your confidence is below a particular threshold or above it. And this is where we'll say, here are the priorities that we worked on this week, and here are the priorities that we're going to be working on next week. And then you can talk about some risk and blockers, but obviously it's important that you make these things actionable. We don't want to whine and complain about what's not working, but we want to ask people to help us get unstuck. Now, obviously, there's always room for a bit of notes. to share what you're excited about for next week or what you're proud of achieving this week, but don't use this for novel writing practice. We want to make sure that people actually read this stuff. But when you do this, it's a very effective way to create, on one hand, the cadence, because we have to talk about our confidence every week in order to send this email, and also a good way to be transparent towards the rest of the organization and to get feedback. So what you have to do with this email is you have to send it to anyone that asks to receive it, and that will get you in trouble. And I can say this because I speak from experience. So the first time I did this, there was somebody in the sales department who also said, hey, can you put me on that list? And then what happened is this person started to completely weaponize all of the information that I was sharing. And as a consequence of that, we had some really difficult conversations. Now that person went about it in a rather aggressive way, and therefore it wasn't very comfortable for the team, but nevertheless, I welcome it in principle, because if we look at the organization as a whole, then this is producing a good outcome, right? What this person was basically saying is, we're spending an amount of money over here, which I think we should have been spending over here. And that is a good conversation to have. So in short, I love OKRs when done right. And done right means having an outcome, not an output-based objective, right? Making sure that you're doing a business thing rather than a technical thing. Having health metrics to ensure that you're not losing track of important assets that you cannot sacrifice. Having frequent check-ins, and having your status email. So back to my client. Here's the strategy for this quarter and the next quarter. It's a 17-page long document, or actually presentation, right? Font size 9, no pictures. And I was like, So there are a lot of moving parts in this document, and I'm starting to read it. I have to start a few times over because it's actually not written in a very, how do I say this politely? In a very entertaining way. And I get stuck and stuck and stuck. So here's what I think we should do to this strategy. No, not like that. Like this. We have to look at it from a different angle, right? Because when we look at things from a different angle, then we'll yield valuable insights, okay? Now, how are we going to do this? Are we going to have conversations every time again? I don't know if any of you have ever walked around here in the city and some tourist came up to you and your phone is empty or you don't have it with you, and they say like, sorry, could you tell me how to get to Gellerbad? And you're like, well, of course. So follow the avenue here, the third block to the left, then cross the bridge to the other side of the city, and then you have to go to the left again, 2 more blocks, then to the right, and then you're there. And they walk away, and then you wonder, or wait a minute, was it 5 blocks and then to the left? Stories are not the most effective format to talk about how we're moving in a landscape. They're a bad format for gaining situational awareness. And the problem with stories is that we have to have a conversation every time again when we want to share what we're doing with the rest of the organization. And if you're a growing organization, that does not scale. So what to do instead? Well, what do you do when you're going somewhere? What are the first 2 apps that you open on your smartphone? Well, mostly maps, right? Or perhaps yesterday when it was raining so badly, you check the weather if it's at any point in time going to stop raining. And based on that, you might adjust your strategy. Perhaps you thought of walking here, but you decided that it was perhaps better, given the weather, to take the metro instead, right? These apps will give you situational awareness, and they allow you to move within the landscape and to establish what a good plan is. So let's talk about maps for a second. So Simon Wardley talked about like what makes a good map. So this is a model of a map, and it's a model, so it's wrong, but it's sometimes useful. So when we look at a map is visual, right? It immediately provokes an image, and that's useful, right? We don't have to read 17-page long document. We immediately can start to form a picture. Now, a map has context, right? This is not the map of the entire world throughout the entire history. No, this map is about a specific part of Greece during a specific time period, a particular Greek mythological battle, and maybe even a sub-part of that, right? So it's about a particular thing and not about everything. Now, the map has position, right? I can point onto various parts of the map, and that means that I'm talking about referring to a position within the landscape. And we can do that because all of the elements on the map are positioned in relationship towards of the anchor. Now, the anchor in most geographical maps is the magnetic north, right? Which is what we see here in the top right corner. And because we have this positioning, we can also have movement, right? You see the red arrows, right? That's talking about how we want to move within the landscape. Now, finally, we have components, right? We see various things on this map. We see land masses, we see mountains, we see cities, we see crosses, and all of these things mean different things. Now, does this map have all of the detail? No, it has the parts that are relevant, right? It's an abstraction. All right, so what would a map like that look like for business? So Simon Wardley thought about that and he produced one. And one of the principles that is based upon is you have to know your users. So a Wardley map always starts with knowing your user. And the second thing is we have to focus on the user need. What does that user need? Not want, because that's not always the same, right? The user might want a faster horse, but they need a car. So let's go back to Shoppy Floppy, right? Who's our user? Well, it's the lazy person. It's the couch potato that is sitting at home and wants to watch Netflix and eat Ben & Jerry's ice all evening and not go to the grocery store anymore, right? So we have a lazy person, and what do they need? Well, they need to consume everyday items, right? Well, and what do they need for that? Well, they need urgency, right? If there wasn't any urgency, they would just order with a regular grocery store instead of, or pick it up a few days later when they're going to visit the store. What else do they need? Well, they need the Shoppy Floppy offering, right? The things we're selling. Well, what does that need? Well, our catalog. And what does that need? Well, everyday items. So what we're doing is we're building up a chain of needs. So we're going down and down further in the value chain. What does everyday items need? Well, pricing. And what does pricing need? Well, suppliers. So we're building up our value chain. And the further we move down, the less the user is able to perceive it. You, as a customer of Shoppy Floppy, you don't really care whether that bucket of Ben & Jerry ice comes from one supplier or the other. To you, it's the same, right? All right, so this is not yet a map, right? Because we have meaning in one direction, but not in the other. So there's another important thing when we're talking about Wardley Maps. So there are climatic patterns in a market, right? A climatic pattern is something that we don't have choice over. Yesterday, when it rained, we couldn't deny that reality, right? It rained, and we had to deal with it. We had to adopt our strategy. And that's the same in business, right? And a climatic pattern in business is everything evolves. So imagine it's the 60s, and we're a fly on the wall at Bell Laboratories in their boardroom. And somebody comes driving in with a cart, and on it is an object the size of a fridge, and they park it in the middle of the boardroom, take the cigarette out of their mouth and say, "Here it is, a mobile phone." And the rest of the people in the boardroom go like, "Wait, what?" And they walk around it. The whole thing is held together by rope. They're kind of amazed, but similarly appalled. There's key codes on it, and if they punch the numbers, they can actually call their mother. So it works, it demonstrates the concept, but it's not really a sellable product, right? They don't really know what they have to do with this. Now imagine it's 10 years later, and that same organization produces custom-built phones for the military, right? For generals to call with each other. Now I don't know if they're going to be talking strategy or beers, but whatever. And it's another 10 years later, and now it's the 80s, right? All Wall Street traders have a mobile phone, and perhaps, I don't know, I had a weird uncle that was carrying one around like a small suitcase, like, "Hey, look at me, I have a phone." And then if you're my age, another 10 years later, mobile phones have become so ubiquitous that all of us have a Nokia 3210 in our pockets that we use to call our moms, right? Hey, I'm gonna be home late again. So everything evolves in a competitive marketplace, right? From the novel, wow, can we do that? This is fantastic, but it's not something sellable yet. To custom build, we're creating it for this one customer, but if somebody else comes along, we have to create it again. To the productized form, right? We can sell it to many people in the market. To a commoditized form, we don't care if we're getting it from one supplier or another. So let's look at our Shopee Floppy example again, right? If I put all of these components in the corresponding quadrant, what do you notice? Anything that seems odd? So down here, we have pricing, which is far away from the user, right? The user can't really perceive that. And for some reason, that's custom built, right? We typically do things custom because that allows us to create more value. But if it's that far away from the user, what type of value are we creating? Maybe this made sense a few years ago, but nowadays not anymore. So when we're talking about Wardley Maps, you don't necessarily have to understand the domain in order to be able to apply general thinking to start to challenge what you see on the map, right? The map allows us to talk about bias within the organization, and it allows us to uncover some of the assumptions behind the map. And that's very helpful because that helps us to make better decisions. You see that everyday items thing there? So that's a sort of a pipeline. You can imagine that's multiple things, right? So obviously eggs and coffee are very commonly accepted products. Everybody wants to have those. And then in one particular market, we started selling COVID tests in 2020 because we wanted to see if people would buy them. And then if they would, we would start to productize that and roll that out into other markets. And we even are now experimenting with HIV tests as well, but there we're not really seeing any adoption, right? So a pipeline allows us to talk about various subcomponents, right? And you can imagine it's one of them. So it kind of reads as an OR. So how to make a map? Well, identify the user, right? That's the anchor of our map. Everything is positioned in relationship towards the anchor. Then list the relevant needs of that user below. And then ask what component is needed in order to satisfy that user need. And what does the value chain look like? And then put components on the axis of evolution. And then, because everything evolves, right? Everything evolves from the genesis to the custom build, to product, to commodity. Now, when we Wardley map our ecosystem, then we can make our assumptions explicit. And maps make it easier to challenge the strategy because we have a common framework to structure our thinking. We don't have to have an individual conversation every time. We can use similar heuristics. And maps allow us to ask, why here over there? We can spot opportunities in the landscape, and we can talk about which of those opportunities would be best to pursue. And different areas of the map ask for different needs, right? Different skills and attitudes. Because characteristics evolve, that also means that we have to work different in that part of the map. And finally, we can trace the value chain in order to spot constraints and therefore risk and impact for the end user. We can do that bottom up, but we can also do that top down. And that's very helpful to talk about these things with various disciplines, right? We can explain to people in product why some engineering constraint is an issue or the other way around. Okay, Marijn, great, maps, but what about those OKRs? So we can put ourselves on the map, right? Shopee Floppy can be an anchor on the map. We're a user of our systems too, right? And we're in Genesis because we are burning VC money at an unprecedented rate. Now, one of our needs is our objective, right? Achieving it. We want to catapult ourselves into the market. Now, I've put that into custom because we're doing that custom for every market again, because we haven't really figured out yet what that process looks like in various countries and in various regions. So it would be too early to start to productize this process. But I do have scale-up clients that actually talk about provisioning a market. They literally have productized that process. And then what we put below there is our key result, right? So a key result that we think here will drive our adoption in the market is a high average order value. And now below that, I have a hypothesis, right? We think that we need to drive the perception of value up so that people feel that they're getting the most value for their money. And one of the ways we want to achieve that is by improving price communication, and specifically by introducing strike-through pricing. Now, by visualizing it like this, we're effectively relating the higher level objective to the lower level constraint, our pricing component. And what can happen now is somebody in the organization can say, I understand the reasoning here, however, you don't know what the pricing component looks like. We have made choices there that are going to make it very difficult to implement strike-through pricing. But knowing what the hypothesis is that you have, namely the perception of value needs to go up, and you want to do something with price communication, I propose we do this other thing instead, which will allow us to test that hypothesis as well. So by doing this, we're creating a framework for reasoning about the OKRs that we're trying to achieve and where we're running into trouble, right? That can be upfront, but it can also be during the process. Now, what we can also do is we can visualize how particular key results are evolving, right? So you could imagine that as proof accumulates for our hypothesis and we start to see that this is actually making sense, that it's effectively moving to the right. It's no longer something questionable. We start to see that we have that we're making progress there. So that's a way we can start to visualize these things. What we can also visualize is inertia. So the fact that we are having trouble to make that movement, right? And inertia can be various things. I once was a piece of inertia within a map that I produced because I was very attached to a system that I had built. And we should have just replaced that thing with a product in the market. But I was like, oh, but I engineered this so beautiful. And it is slightly nicer than the thing in the market. And yeah, one feature was really nicer than that general thing in the market. But it was also costing us a lot of attention to maintain this, right? So inertia can be various things. It can be existing business models that we don't want to interfere with. It can be interests of individuals. It can be, problems, welcoming change. But by visualizing it, we have something to point at and we have something to talk about. Now, perhaps you feel that Genesis, custom-built, product, and commodity are weird labels when we're talking about the evolution of a hypothesis. You can just put different labels on the different stages. So here I've chosen for novel, divergent, convergent, and accepted. And then all of a sudden, it tends to click a bit better with people. So OKRs and Wardley Maps, they work when the department, OKRs and Wardley Maps, the departments and teams can be an anchor on the map, right? You can put individual people on the map. And in this case, we've put our organization on there. And the objectives can be the needs of that anchor, right? And the hypothesis can be a set of components within a pipeline. Now, perhaps, you have somebody that is trying to interfere with all of this. Maybe the manager responsible for the project is actually being judged by different criteria. So you might put them on there as well to visualize the friction that is going on there, right? The fact that they are judged differently than your project might be the reason why you're not being able to make change. So you can leverage that pattern. So as proof accumulates, we start to move our hypothesis to the right of the map. Or if we realize that our hypothesis was wrong, we can mark the time of death and move on to another hypothesis, right? Now we can visualize the inertia that we experience to achieve our goal. And the map is simply a vehicle to point out our organizational bias, right? To talk about the preferences that we have and to make them discussable. So don't take what everyone says at a conference at face value. Dennis Doman said that a while ago, and I like that quote. He's also here. And I find it important to make a little disclaimer. So I showed you a map, which was a NDA-compatible version of what I'd done with my client. But this is what the real thing looked like, right? As you see, there are a lot more moving parts to it. And what I want to say is, this map helped me ask better questions. So what you'll see in the top left, coming up, you'll see a bunch of questions. And some of them got answers and some not. But the thing that I realized by producing this map was, well, this organization thought one component was far more evolved for them than I think it was. And that was actually the reason why I predicted that the project wouldn't really take off. They never really addressed that, and I was unable to convince them. So in that sense, it wasn't necessarily successful. But on the other hand, it spared me from investing a lot of time and energy in something that was doomed to fail from the beginning. So I think this was very helpful for me. So the answer is not always going to be, here's how you're going to achieve it. Maybe it's going to learn you that what they're trying to do is not going to be something that is going to work out. Now, how does this relate to software design? Well, mapping will help us build up a common language. And it will also help us think in abstractions. Whenever I have to put those components on that map, I have to give those things a name, and I have to think about what is that conceptually. And those abstractions are helpful, and we can reuse them. Now, we have to start the map with the user and the user need. And by doing that, we get forced to ask the question, why are we doing this? For who are we doing this? What are we trying to achieve? And that is very helpful because a lot of organizations still produce things for other reasons. And finally, mapping will help us differentiate our approach. Depending on the area of the map that we're in, we might need very different approach, whether that is how we're approaching the software development process, or what people we use to staff the team with. So looking back and into the future, OKRs work when they're frequently evaluated. The objective should inspire, and it should aim for the moon. The key results are measurable, and they indicate success. And it's clear why we have chosen one objective over all of the other possible things that we could have done. Combine OKRs and Wardley Maps to articulate business and technical strategy in a single picture, right? So that we can talk about it with everyone. And uncover the decisions below, uncover the assumptions below our decisions. And make it easier for people to challenge what we're doing. It unifies the language, and finally, it allows us to share knowledge within the organization. So I have some resources. I'll publish the slides, and you can click on these links. I highly recommend them. And in case you like this presentation, tell your friends, tell your boss, and tell the internet. It was a privilege to speak to you today. And if you have any questions, I'd love to take them now.
Thank you very much. My colleague is going to come with the handheld mic, but we have an announcement here. Not so much a question, but I mean, you can comment on it if you would like. Yeah. You can speculate on what's going on in the parking lot. Christoph has the handheld mic, yes? And we could take a couple of quick questions from the audience. Just put up your hand and we'll bring a mic to you. It can be related to the talk. It can be a personal question.
Yeah.
Do we have a question over here? Yes, Nick.
I don't really have an exact question, but I was intrigued by that very deep Wardley map you showed, the one you NDA'd out.
Yeah.
So, maybe you could just tell us about that, how you build something that big, because most of the examples people will see online will be pretty small, but that was like 6 Wardley maps stacked on top of each other. So any insights you could give us into something in a real situation like that?
Yeah. So I think what happens if you map by yourself is you have one level of abstraction that you're thinking in, right? And so you have less conversations about the abstractions that you choose, and therefore, typically, you can make a map that is a bit more fine-grained at a faster pace. If you would do that with a group of people, then there's always somebody that says, sorry, that name that we chose for that component doesn't feel quite right to me. So when you're mapping yourself, you can just pick your abstractions that work for you, and typically you'll quickly end up with a map at that level if you get a bit more acquainted with the format. Because in order to go from one component to another, sometimes you really need to add a few abstractions in between, like I showed with. We have a high average order value. That's something that we want to achieve, or that's a hypothesis that's a key result. We have a hypothesis, and then it doesn't immediately go to the pricing component. We could do that, but we're robbing ourselves of all of the thinking that happens in between. So all of those things that were on that map were basically words that I read in that strategy document somehow, right? Or could have been words that I've heard in conversations. And I just start to put those on there and start to connect the dots. And then once you've done that, you can take somebody through it, right? And they'll start to say, this is wrong, that's wrong, this is wrong, that's wrong, which is okay, because typically there's actually far more connections. And that's good, right? Because as we've seen with the example of the map from Greece, when we're having that conversation, we can together decide, is that a detail that matters for the question that we're trying to answer or not? And so together we can find the level of abstraction that's right. And that's not a map I would use to pitch the whole story again to management, right? So that's maybe something that I would show to different experts that really are in depth on the problem. And then once we agree on what we have concluded, we would say, okay, how do we paint a picture that everyone can easily relate to? And you just sort of distill it back to 10, 15 components, because that's something that's easy to comprehend. Does that answer your question?
I think that's pretty spot on, mate. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you so much. I want to show you the gifts that we have for you.
Yeah.
First is a Budapest notebook. You can plan your next talk in this notebook.
Yeah.
This is for the stream. And we've got an artist rendering of you that you could put on your ego wall back home.
Okay.
And this is our gifts to you. Please, one more last round of applause for Marijn. There you go, bro.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Pleasure.